Hello, everyone. Nice to see you guys again. This is the Sage of Calidor, and today I have another video to give to you. Um, I know it's been a while, but I have been busy, but here is another video for you guys. Um, Before we begin, I do not know if I talked about this before, but I want to clarify something. There were a couple of videos ago. I know I'm breaking my own rule on not allowing politics on this channel, yada yada yada. But some things I feel like needs to be said. A few of my videos, you will know what it is. The video is with this caption right here, but you cannot access it because you need to have an account to access it. And to tell you the gist of it, and this is basic, and I think it can lead into something else. It came from several videos within the fantasy community that I was concerned about, namely Warhammer Fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons, and I was concerned about that. You see, there is a fine line between tuning a world to make it better for everyone and enforcing your own agenda on it. I mean, certain things in the lore of various worlds exist. They should always exist because they have the legitimacy of continuality, and changing it just because you do not agree with it actually does not work. And also, certain things that I talked about back then, I learned now. Like Lore Master of Sotek, really knowledgeable guy, talked about the police incident with George Floyd. Um, I will express more in this channel, in my other channel, the Crusader Historian. Feel free to check that out. But I'll let the Crusader Historian take over from here. But let's just say some new information came in that I never expressed. Also, certain content. Here is the thing. Who do you, and this is for content creators, and this is important to my video. Who do you please? The social justice warriors and people who are obsessed with identity politics and accusing you of racism, white privilege, or whatever, or the real actual fans that love the franchises, love the games, and love the characters and love the stories. If you want to develop new characters, that's cool, but make them real actual characters. Like, for example, let's look at Star Wars. Mace Windu. Sure, he's black, but he was a great character. So if you want to create a character, so look at that as an idea. Also, Dritz Duerden. He's a fan favorite character. So look at that for a character idea. Stop putting politics on our throats and just develop new stories. Great stories, I meant. And this fight was in Wizards of the Coast, Games Workshop, and yeah, but thankfully, there is, thankfully, due to this gentleman called Arch, he informed us there were some miscommunications, but I urge you to go on to Arch's channel. Arch, his other name is Arch Warhammer, and his videos was one of the things that inspired this channel. Anyway, we are talking about something else more fun, something else more interesting, and it is Lord of the Rings. And I admit this video was a couple of years in the making, but I will try to get my thoughts together. I was excited when Amazon said we are going to make a Lord of the Rings TV series because Lord of the Rings was my first real introduction into the fantasy lore. And I read as many books as I could about this topic. I got the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read that. I got The Hobbit. I got the Silmarillion, and I read through all of that. I got Morgoth's Ring. I read through all of that. The Unfinished Tales. I read that. And not to mention, there was this Tolkien guidebook that I read as well. So you can call me crazy Tolkien fan as it is. Oh, and may I also say that I have the extended edition of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and managed to watch my way through them all. Yeah, I know, that's pretty insane. But anyway, I was excited. And I heard there were two considerable options with this. The first one was The Life of Aragorn, which I would say would be pretty cool, because as long as they stay true to the Aragorn shown in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and also remain true to the lore that Tolkien wrote, and not to mention, there was this small story called The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen that talked about Aragorn's life, and it talked about how he spent time incognito fighting alongside the Free Peoples against Sauron, and he been to Gondor, Rohan, and other places. And during all this time, he was quite remarkable. It was quite remarkable. But the first stage was also on the table, and reading the Silmarillion, I thought it would be cool to actually see Morgoth, Sauron's master. And my favorite scene, I will admit, is the scene shown in the lower right-hand corner. One of the Sons of Fëanor, a High Elf King, I think I botched the pronunciation, sorry, him dueling Morgoth in single combat. I love the description, how he rode off to the gates of Angband, blew his horn, and challenged Morgoth to single combat. When Morgoth, who was quite scared and kind of cowardly, he didn't want to accept, but he knew that if he didn't accept, he would look weak in front of his captains. But the High Elf King, he drew his sword Ringel, who glittered like ice, and fought him, and was the first and only person who is not of the valor to deal Morgoth several wounds. And even though Morgoth defeated him, the forces of evil don't like to talk about this. And what was so cool and so tragic is he fits the motif of a tragic hero. If you read his story, he was caught up in the kinslaying on the pathway to the Cimmerils. If you want a video about that, feel free to tell me. I know Warhammer Fantasy is my starter thing, but if you read my introduction, watched my intro video, you can tell I like to do other things. And not to mention, his death was seen as tragic because he was one of the few stabilizing influences of the High Elves. The life of Aragorn I liked a lot. I will say, should Amazon go through with this, they should, one, have someone that looks like a resemblance to the actual Aragorn from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. You might tie in the Hobbit of him meeting Legolas. But here is one thing. Aragorn is an honorable man. Despite a flaw that he has that he does not feel worthy about accepting his destiny, filled with self-doubt, he is an honorable man. And as such, I would have said in this video, if I caught him engaging in immoral sexual behavior against someone else, cheating on Arwen, you can say this channel would have a field day. But we are going to be having a different video. And this video, from what I heard, is taking place in the Second Age. Now, before we begin, I need to say something about this. There is some recent accusations, recent fights, and this draws from an earlier video. I would recommend you to check on Just Some Guy's channel. I think that's what his name, Just Some Guy, and he talks about the feud between identity politics people and actual fandom, and he talks about what a fan actually is. I need to tell you this. First, look up his video. Second off, Tolkien's works are based off of medieval Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian culture and the surrounding areas. Some would say that Gondor was based on the Byzantine Empire. The Easterlings were based on the tribes Gondor the Byzantine Empire has fought against, namely the Mongols, the Sassanids, and that's kind of how it was shown. Rohan was based off an Anglo-Saxon world that used cavalry. Tolkien did not like the Normans. He liked Anglo-Saxon culture because he was a professor of Anglo-Saxon culture and literature, and he was upset that much of the culture of the Anglo-Saxons was gone when the Normans took over. And the Anglo-Saxon world tied with the Scandinavia world has links to Gondor because many Saxons would serve as part of the Varangian Guard in the armies of Gondor. The armies of the Byzantine Empire, but you know what I mean. The Haradrim are based on the southern Arab tribes that raided the Byzantine Empire, likely, and that's it. But I want to say this. This entire world is based off of an Anglo-Saxon Nordic mythology, and Um, you need to keep that in mind. No crap with identity politics. Claims, I want to say this, J.R. Tolkien was not a racist, but don't take my words for it. Just some guy has a special, better video to address, just to address that. Anyway, anyway, linking into the next part, are the wizards going to be in this video? No, because the wizards do not come until this third age, so you cannot, so there can be no wizards in the second age. And why am I saying this? Well, just to keep things as lore friendly as possible. I am not against certain creative liberties. I did not mind Arwen bringing Frodo to safety. I would have loved to see Glorfindel, but Glorfindel, if I recall correctly, did not do too much in the books. Maybe I will say this. I do not know if he showed up in the second age buff, but if he did, this will be a perfect time to slip him in there. But yeah, so I'm not against creative liberties, but they have to be kind of realistic-ish. Arwen did have some ancestors, some female ancestors who actually participated in dangerous activities. Luthien was involved in a raid on Morgoth. If you want a video, feel free to let me know. And from my understanding, the sword that her father and later her wielded, it was crafted as a defense weapon for Eärendil, Princess of Gondolin, I believe. Yes. Elven men and women were equal, but most women just simply chose not to fight unless in self-defense. And this is kind of a part of like staying true to the lore and creative liberty. Arwen did not fight in the battle as often, but she probably would have looked really cool fighting in it. I'm not going to deny, but she was more influential to the story because it was her that caused Aragorn to ultimately become king, but no wizards in the second season. In the second age. But what hopefully we will see is the Last Alliance. I will say this, as a history nerd and as a buff and fan of Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth, there is a lot of content. Now I will say this, despite the crap I am giving about identity politics and crap, I will say if Amazon pulls off a TV series, takes its time, does it just as good as The Mandalorian, if not better, I will be happy. It will be awesome to see multiple seasons. I can see multiple seasons which will end up, and I think it will be cool to see the last season or the last part of the last season or the last part of the season, like as a build up to the Last Alliance, and maybe as a final episode, like maybe a little transition into some parts of the Fellowship of the Ring when the Last Alliance of elves and men fought against the armies of Sauron. Sorry, I've been having some problems with the recording, but anyway, Numenor. What is this? This is an island given to a group of people that assisted the elves in the war against Morgoth, which will be pretty awesome if we show um, part of the part of the wars in the first stage. But I would love to see most of the TV series show the Numenorians, because these people, they're, I want to say awesome, I want to see amazing, but they are the greatest human race, the greatest human faction kingdom in the world. They were given this island as payment, and for their devoted service, a place they called their own, extended lifespan. They were the perfection of humanity. They had a longer lifespan. Of course, that also comes from the fact they intermingled with the elves and were blessed with a long life. But anyway, these guys are the ancestors of Aragorn and Gondor, the ancestors of the Dunedain, so they have to look the part. I am talking about the greatest civilization on the planet, but I will say this: the Second Age is around the time that the elves are also at the height of their power, because they are trying to undo and repair Middle Earth after all the damage that has been done. Of course, that might be a point of contention, because Aragorn, because the elves had a lot of wonderful cities. Um, Darth Gandalf is excellent in medieval warfare, and he said that the city-state kingdoms of the First Age had at least 10,000 warriors, and by the time of the Third Age, they had maybe over 1,000 total. However, the Last Alliance displayed a lot of elves, so I want to say this: the elves were the mightiest civilization on the planet. This has to be shown, and they should not be shown as haughty and arrogant, because they must be dignified. I would say, kind of look at it like the elves are um, trying to do good, maintain honor and dignity, but trying to do good, but with a slow and steady process, like, and keeping an eye on the world to protect it from Sauron. Of course, the elves did believe in second chances, and that's why they were tricked by Sauron. And so, as a result, they were not prepared for war. And but I will say this: the elves of this world are actually based on Scandinavian mythology. I am sorry there's no drow here. The only dark elves are just, they look like the elves here. It's just for cultural reasons. But I will say this: the elves here have to be seen at the height of their power, and I do not want the lords looking arrogant like Thranduil. I want to see them act respectful, generous, like Elrond did. Respectful, generous, and patient, because the elves, this was a time in which elves and men and dwarfs got along. Speaking of which, this is an era to show the dwarves at the height of their grandeur. I'm talking about Moria was ruled by the dwarves at this time. Mithril all over the place. And this has to be shown like this right here. Now, this is something you must understand. Sauron is a villain, and he seeks to dominate and rule over all life. This whole thing is personal power to him. And this goes into a pet peeve that I have, that a lot of people, or some people, are talking about making the orcs look good. I mean, Tolkien wrote that there were orcs that fought alongside the Free Peoples in the last alliance, but I will say this, only the elves were united. There were no elves that fought against Sauron, fought alongside Sauron, so keep that in mind. But the but here's something that needs to be understood. I would again reference just some guy. The orcs are not pleasant creatures. They're supposed to look sickly, wrong, and corrupted because the original orcs were corrupted elves and humans that were transformed. Here is the thing that you need to understand about Sauron. Yes, the Easterlings are evil. Yes, the Haradrim are evil, but that's only because Sauron lied to them to get them on his side. He took advantage of their envy of the elves and desiring for eternal life. He took advantage of the elves trying to heal the world from the damage of the First Age, and thus created the rings, which brought about a terrifying war. He also corrupted the Númenóreans. They lived a long lifespan, but over time they grew to fear death. But what I'm saying is this. Sauron has to be shown as the ultimate corrupter. He cannot, and I do not want to see a face, I want to see him in like a mask similar to this. An iron helm. He needs to look like, in certain cases, as someone who corrupts everything. There is nothing good about him. There's nothing good about his servants. I mean, this is kind of what Lord Elrond wrote. What Lord of the Rings Weapons and Warfare wrote about the orcs and Sauron's servants. They're twisted, evil, and hatred. Their eyes burn with poisonous hate. The only way the forces of good can have a chance of survival is if these things can be eradicated entirely. This needs to be kept in mind. Orcs, Sauron's servants, orcs and trolls must be seen as sick and demented. They have to die, and they're in a wide variety of colors. Some orcs are black, some orcs are pale, some orcs are in between. So anyway, that needs to happen. Of course, this brings us to the Númenóreans. Now, I will say throughout history, Númenóreans started out good, and they had powerful armies and powerful navies, but they at first set up colonies, but they were trading outposts. They came to the lesser races of men, like the men with lesser lifespan, as bringers of gifts and wisdom and allies and friends. And they also had a long friendship with the elves. This did not always hold. There were the first ruling queen of Númenor gave no aid to Gil-galad, but that's mostly because she wanted to spite her father, because her father was away at war helping Gil-galad. Who is Gil-galad? The king of the elves, which brings up to another topic. I apologize, but my notes are all bungled all over the place. I sure hope we get to see more of Gil-galad, and he was depicted as a wise, honorable high king. And in this one, and he was a mentor to Elrond, so he needs to be seen as someone who's a mentor to Elrond, and also is friends with Galadriel and several others. And this was, you can say, a time in which the heroes that we know and love in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit come into their own and learn various things. So, yeah. Anyway, back to the whole thing. I mean, there were a few ruling queens. Some were good, some were not so good. But the Numenorians started out decent. But over time, but no civilization is perfect. Over time, they would go out and conquer areas. But the areas they conquered, they would initially treat the people there with respect. And were also spending it fighting against Sauron's enemies. It wasn't until the reign of Ar-Pharazôn, which I would think would be an excellent showcase, because this is when Numenor is at the height of its power, when they started becoming, well, they stopped being bringers of gifts and friendship and became men of war. This scene here shows a moment where Sauron surrendered to Ar-Pharazôn, the last king of Numenor, and he took Sauron prisoner. And over time, Sauron corrupted him and said, "If you worship my master Morgoth, he will grant you eternal life," and which is essentially a form of devil worship. And this is another, and so this thing, I think, this is what I want. I do not want things to be overly sexual. Like, I heard there is a sexual coordinator for the Lord of the Rings. I don't want this. I want this PG, but I want this kind of PG. I want this PG, but I do not want it awkward in case younger siblings walk into the room. Well, in case younger people walk into the room. Look at Lord of the Rings as a guide. It was done well. And you can get your point across without excessive bloody violence like Game of Thrones. I do not want another Game of Thrones. I want Lord of the Rings. I want to see a grand, glorious kingdom fall from grace because they listened to the lies and half-truths of someone who they turned from good, honorable individuals into fierce men of war that conducted terrible acts and enslaved many and sacrificed so many people, including their own, because at this point, Numenor was split between the faithful, who were people that still retained the good old-fashioned customs, and the king's men who followed Ar-Pharazôn. And this needs to be shown in the clips. And this needs to be emphasized in great details. Why? Because it was the faithful who left and established Gondor and Aranor, and who later participated in the Last Alliance. Look at the downfall of Numenor as a guide, and I'm going to say this. I love Lord of the Rings. I love Middle-earth. It is one of my fondest memories, and I'm not going to let it die without a fight. I apologize if my thoughts are bungled and all over the place. But I am still, it's like a muscle. The more you do this, the better you are. The more time you have spent between doing this, the worse it gets. And it's been a while since I did this, so I appreciate your patience. But the one last thing I will say this is, keep in mind, J.R.R. Tolkien was a devout Christian, and he inserted some of his teachings, some of his beliefs into his writing. Is the Lord of the Rings world an allegory? Yes, but it is also a tale trying to reconcile the loss of Anglo-Saxon culture and a glorious golden age. It was inspired by the grandiose stories of Beowulf and other heroes fighting to do what is right. If they do just as good as Lord of the Rings trilogy, and as good as the Hobbit TV series, which I will say the Lord of the Rings is better than the Hobbit, but this Hobbit is still kind of pretty good in some cases. All I want is a good story. Do not rush it. Take your time on this, because I want to see this full, wonderful age happen. The second age is filled with potential. All they have are accounts of kings and in passing tales of the war against Sauron. So you can do a lot of stuff. And so I admit this video I kind of brought out to anyone. If you, some random person is watching this, great. Feel free to share this. If not, that's perfectly fine. I'm sorry, I'm a bit tired, but I wanted to get this out. I do not want Lord of the Rings to fall the same way like other series did. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on this, let me tell you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down. If you want me to clarify something, I will be more willing to actually do that. Anyway, thank you for the time. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye.